The sound of sneakers squeaking against polished marble echoed through the hallway of Westfield Academy like gunshots in a cathedral. 12-year-old Malik Thompson pressed his back against the cold stone wall, clutching his violin case so tightly his knuckles had gone white beneath his brown skin. The scent of expensive floor polish, mixed with the faint aroma of cafeteria food, couldn't mask the metallic taste of fear coating his tongue. 3 boys approached him with the predatory confidence that only comes from knowing the system will protect you, their designer uniforms pristine, while Malik's identical outfit somehow looked wrong on his frame, as if the fabric itself knew he didn't belong. If you've ever felt like an outsider in a place where you should feel safe, this story might echo something deep in your own experience. Stay with me, and maybe share in the comments how you found your strength when the world felt stacked against you. Well, if it isn't Scholarship Boy, sneered Bradley Whitmore, his voice carrying the particular cruelty that privileged 13-year-olds had perfected over generations. His father owned half the commercial real estate in the city, and Bradley wore that legacy like armor. Behind him stood Connor Hayes and James Morrison, sons of a federal judge and a pharmaceutical executive respectively, their faces wearing expressions of practiced disdain that they'd learned at country club dinners and charity galas, where people like Malik's family were discussed in hushed tones as those people who needed helping. Malik's fingers tightened around his violin case handle, the worn leather strap cutting into his palm. The instrument inside had belonged to his grandmother, a woman who'd played in jazz clubs during an era when black musicians weren't allowed to enter through the front door, but whose talent was undeniable enough to pack houses night after night. The violin was worth more than most cars, but its true value lay in the stories it carried, the dreams it had witnessed, the legacy it represented. None of these boys would understand that kind of inheritance. "I heard your dad bought his way into the parent committee," Connor added, his voice dropping to a stage whisper that somehow carried further than shouting. "My mum says new money always tries too hard to fit in where it doesn't belong." The words hit Malik like physical blows, each syllable designed to remind him that no matter how much his father achieved, no matter how many businesses he built or charitable foundations he funded, there would always be people who saw him as an interloper in spaces they considered their birthright. Malik had heard these conversations at home, had seen the way his father's jaw tightened when he read certain newspaper editorials or received particular invitations that felt more like tests than welcomes. "Leave me alone," Malik said quietly, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. He'd learned early that showing fear only made things worse, that bullies fed on visible weakness like sharks drawn to blood in the water. "Or what?" Bradley stepped closer. Close enough that Malik could smell the expensive cologne that probably cost more than most families spent on groceries in a month. "You'll call your daddy. Tell him the mean kids are picking on his little prince." The hallway felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in as other students began to gather, drawn by the magnetic pull of potential conflict. Some watched with the hungry anticipation of spectators at a gladiator match, while others looked away with the practiced indifference of those who'd learned that intervention came with consequences they weren't prepared to face. The marble beneath Malik's feet felt cold even through his shoes, and he could hear the distant sound of a teacher's voice from behind a closed classroom door, so close, yet impossibly far away. "My father doesn't need to fight my battles," Malik replied, lifting his chin with a dignity that his grandmother had taught him was his birthright, regardless of what anyone else believed. "Dad, but he did teach me that bullies usually pick on people because they're afraid of something in themselves." The observation hit its mark. Bradley's face flushed red, and Connor took a half-step forward, as if preparing to escalate from words to something more physical. But before anyone could cross that line, the sharp click of dress shoes on marble announced the approach of Mrs. Hendricks, the vice principal whose reputation for swift justice had earned her both respect and fear from students across all grade levels. "Oh, gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 30 years navigating the politics of private education, "I trust you're having a productive conversation about your upcoming history project." The boys scattered like roaches when a light switches on, muttering excuses and avoiding eye contact as they melted back into the stream of students changing classes. But Bradley paused just long enough to lean close to Malik's ear and whisper, "This isn't over, Scholarship Boy. Your daddy's money can't protect you forever." Mrs. Hendricks waited until the hallway had cleared before approaching Malik, her expression softening in a way that suggested she'd witnessed this scene too many times before. "Everything all right, mister?" "Now, Thompson." Malik nodded, not trusting his voice to remain steady. He'd learned that admitting to being bullied often made things worse, painting a target on his back that grew larger with each adult intervention. The unspoken rule of survival at Westfield Academy was simple: handle your own problems or risk being labelled a snitch, a designation that would follow him through graduation and beyond. "I'm fine, Mrs. Hendricks. Just discussing the Revolutionary War assignment." She studied his face with the practiced eye of an educator who'd learned to read between the lines of student interactions. "Mr. Thompson, you know my door is always open if you need to discuss anything at all." "Yes, ma'am, thank you." As she walked away, her heels clicking a staccato rhythm against the marble, Malik allowed himself a moment to breathe. The hallway smelled different now, less like fear and more like the lemon oil they used to polish the wooden trophy cases that lined the walls. Those cases held decades of achievements from Westfield Academy students: academic honors, athletic championships, artistic recognitions. But Malik had never seen a single photo of someone who looked like him among the golden nameplates and gleaming awards. The rest of the school day passed in a blur of advanced mathematics, European history and chemistry labs where Malik excelled despite the constant undercurrent of isolation that followed him from classroom to classroom. His teachers praised his work with the kind of surprised enthusiasm that suggested they hadn't expected such performance from someone with his background, their compliments carrying an undertone of amazement that felt more insulting than encouraging. During lunch, Malik sat alone at a table near the windows, overlooking the academy's meticulously maintained grounds. The cafeteria buzzed with conversations about weekend plans at family estates, upcoming trips to European capitals, and summer internships at companies their parents owned or controlled. He opened his violin case and ran his fingers along the instrument's smooth surface, finding comfort in the familiar texture of wood that had been worn smooth by decades of loving use. "Bah, that's a beautiful violin," said a voice behind him. Malik turned to see Emma Rodriguez, one of the few students at Westfield who'd ever spoken to him without an agenda. Her father was a prominent surgeon, her mother a civil rights attorney, and Emma herself possessed the kind of quiet confidence that came from growing up in a household where achievement was expected, but kindness was valued above all else. "Thank you. It was my grandmother's." Emma slid into the seat across from him, her lunch tray containing the same overpriced cafeteria food that somehow tasted better when you weren't eating it alone. "I heard what happened in the hallway earlier. Bradley Whitmore is a complete waste of oxygen." Malik glanced around nervously, checking to see if anyone was listening. "It's fine. I can handle it." "You shouldn't have to handle it," Emma said firmly. "What they're doing is wrong, and everyone knows it. The problem is that everyone's too scared to say anything because their parents all do business together." This was the reality that Malik had been learning since his first day at Westfield Academy 6 months ago. The school wasn't just an educational institution. It was a networking hub for the city's elite, a place where future business partnerships were forged over science fair projects, and where social hierarchies established in middle school would influence professional relationships for decades to come. Speaking out against bullying wasn't just about playground politics. It was about potentially damaging family fortunes and social standing. "My dad says that sometimes you have to be patient," Malik said, repeating words that his father had shared during one of their evening conversations. "That change takes time, and that proving yourself through excellence is more powerful than fighting every battle." Emma frowned, her dark eyes flashing with the kind of righteous anger that came from growing up in a household where injustice was discussed openly and fought actively. "That's easy to say when you're not the one getting cornered in hallways. How long are you supposed to be patient while they make your life miserable?" It was a question that Malik had been asking himself every day since starting at Westfield Academy. His father, David Thompson, had built a technology empire from nothing, starting with a small computer repair shop in a strip mall and growing it into a multinational corporation that employed thousands of people. David's success had opened doors that had been closed to previous generations of their family, but it had also created new challenges that came with being among the first black families to enter certain social circles. The afternoon brought violin lessons with Mr. Petrov, an elderly Russian immigrant who played with symphony orchestras across Europe before settling into a teaching career at Westfield Academy. The music room was Malik's sanctuary, a place where talent mattered more than last names or family connections. Under Mr. Petrov's guidance, Malik had discovered that his grandmother's musical gift had been passed down through generations, manifesting in his ability to coax emotions from strings and wood that left even his teacher speechless. "Today we work on the Vivaldi, Mr. Petrov announced in his heavily accented English, his weathered hands moving with surprising grace as he demonstrated fingering techniques. "But first, you tell me why your playing sounds angry today." Malik positioned his violin under his chin, the familiar weight bringing immediate comfort. "I'm not angry, Mr. Petrov. Music does not lie, young man. Your bow speaks truth, even when your mouth does not play, and let the anger out through the strings, instead of keeping it locked in your chest." For the next hour, Malik poured his frustration into Vivaldi's Winter, the complex passages demanding technical precision while allowing emotional release. The music filled the room like a living thing, each note carrying the weight of his isolation, his determination, and his growing understanding that excellence alone might not be enough to earn acceptance in this world. When the lesson ended, Mr. Petrov placed a gentle hand on Malik's shoulder. "Your grandmother would be proud," he said simply. "Music is universal language. It speaks to hearts that words cannot reach. Remember this when the world seems too small for your dreams." The walk home took Malik through the city's financial district, where glass towers reached toward the sky like monuments to ambition and achievement. One of those towers bore his father's name, Thompson Technologies, the letters gleaming in gold against black granite. Malik had visited the offices countless times, had seen the respect in employees' eyes when they spoke to his father, had witnessed the way business leaders sought David's advice and partnership. Yet somehow, none of that success translated into acceptance at a middle school where bloodlines mattered more than bank accounts. The Thompson family home sat on 3 acres in the city's most exclusive neighborhood, a modern masterpiece of glass and steel that had been featured in architectural magazines and charity tour brochures. But as Malik walked up the curved driveway, he noticed something that made his stomach clench with dread. Bradley Whitmore's mother's silver Mercedes was parked near the front entrance, its vanity plate reading, "Blessed," in letters that somehow managed to look condescending. Inside, Malik could hear the polite laughter that accompanied adult conversations about charity galas and school fundraisers, the kind of social lubrication that kept the machinery of elite society running smoothly. He slipped through the side entrance, hoping to reach his room without being drawn into whatever performance his parents were staging for their guest. "Malik, sweetheart, come say hello to Mrs. Whitmore," his mother called from the living room, her voice carrying the musical quality that had made her a successful television journalist before she'd married his father. Angela Thompson had her own achievements and accolades, but in certain social circles, she was still primarily known as David Thompson's wife, a reduction that she navigated with grace while privately seething at the limitations placed on her identity. Mrs. Whitmore stood when Malik entered the room, her smile perfectly calibrated to convey warmth without genuine feeling. She was the kind of woman who'd perfected the art of saying cruel things in sweet tones, whose charitable work was motivated more by social positioning than actual compassion. "Malik, Bradley has told me so much about you. He says you're quite the musician." The words carried undertones that Malik was learning to recognize, the subtle emphasis on quite that suggested surprise at his abilities, the way her eyes swept over him, as if cataloguing his appearance for future reference. He wondered what Bradley had actually told his mother about their interactions, whether she knew about the hallway confrontations or if she'd been fed a sanitized version that painted her son as a benevolent mentor to the scholarship student. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore. I enjoy playing violin." "How wonderful. Music is such an important part of a well-rounded education, don't you think?" Of course, Bradley is more focused on athletics and leadership activities. He's captain of the lacrosse team, you know, and president of the student council. We believe in developing the whole child, not just academic achievement. The implication hung in the air like smoke that Malik's musical talents were somehow lesser than Bradley's leadership roles, that artistic achievement was a consolation prize for those who couldn't excel in more important areas. David Thompson's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, a sign that Malik recognized as his father's attempt to maintain diplomatic composure while processing an insult. "Malik has been invited to audition for the State Youth Orchestra," Angela said smoothly, her journalist's instincts allowing her to deflect the slight while highlighting her son's accomplishments. Only 12 students from the entire state receive that honor. Mrs. Whitmore's smile never wavered, but something shifted in her eyes. How impressive. I'm sure that will look wonderful on college applications. These days, admissions committees are so focused on diversity and unique backgrounds. The room fell silent, except for the soft ticking of the antique clock on the mantelpiece, a piece that David had purchased at auction, not because he particularly loved antiques, but because he'd learned that certain objects conveyed status in ways that new money couldn't easily replicate. Malik felt the weight of unspoken tensions, the careful dance of words that adults used when they wanted to wound without appearing overtly hostile. "Well," Mrs. Whitmore continued, gathering her purse with movements that suggested her social obligation had been fulfilled, "I should let you get back to your evening. David, Angela, thank you for the lovely conversation. I'm sure our boys will continue to be great friends at school." After she left, the house felt different, as if her presence had left behind a residue of discomfort that would take time to dissipate. David loosened his tie and sank into his favorite chair, the leather creaking under his weight. "How was school today, son?" Malik hesitated, weighing his options. He could tell his father about the hallway incident, about Bradley's threats and the growing isolation he felt among his classmates, but he'd seen the way his father's shoulders carried the burden of breaking barriers and opening doors, the exhaustion that came from constantly having to prove himself in rooms where his presence was tolerated rather than welcomed. Adding his own struggles to that load felt selfish. "It was fine, Dad. Mr. Petrov says I'm ready to start working on some more advanced pieces." David's face lit up with genuine pride, the kind of expression that reminded Malik why he worked so hard to excel despite the challenges. "That's wonderful, son. Your grandmother would be so proud to see how far you've come with her violin." That night, Malik lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying the day's events in an endless loop. Through his bedroom window, he could see the lights of the city sprawling below, millions of people living their lives with problems and dreams that probably seemed just as overwhelming to them as his did to him. Somewhere out there, other kids were dealing with bullies, other families were navigating the complex dynamics of success and acceptance, other children were learning that the world was more complicated than they'd hoped. The next morning brought news that would change everything, though Malik didn't know it, as he ate breakfast and prepared for another day of careful navigation through Westfield Academy's social minefield. His father was unusually quiet, reading something on his tablet with an expression that Malik couldn't quite decipher. Angela bustled around the kitchen with nervous energy, making conversation that felt forced and overly cheerful. "I'll be picking you up from school today," David announced suddenly, his voice carrying an undertone that suggested the decision wasn't up for discussion. "Why? I usually take the bus. I have a meeting with Mrs. Patterson about the new computer lab donation. Thought you might like to sit in, see how these things work." Mrs. Patterson was Westfield Academy's headmistress, a formidable woman who'd run the school for 15 years with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. The computer lab donation was part of David's ongoing effort to contribute to the school community, a way of ensuring that his son's presence was seen as an asset rather than an intrusion. But something in his father's tone suggested that this meeting might involve more than just discussing hardware specifications and installation timelines. School proceeded with its usual rhythm of academic excellence and social tension. Malik excelled in his morning classes, earning praise from teachers who seemed genuinely surprised by his insights and analytical abilities. During lunch, he sat with Emma Rodriguez and a few other students who existed on the periphery of Westfield's social hierarchy. The children of immigrants who'd achieved success in America, the scholarship students whose academic abilities had earned them spots at the prestigious institution, the quiet kids who preferred books to social climbing. "Did you hear about the new anti-bullying initiative?" Emma asked, picking at her salad while glancing around the cafeteria. "Apparently some parents complained to the school board about the culture here." Malik's attention sharpened. "What kind of initiative?" "Zero tolerance policy, mandatory reporting, counseling programs, the whole thing." My mom heard about it at her book club. She said Mrs. Patterson looked like she'd swallowed a lemon when they told her about the new requirements. The conversation was interrupted by the familiar sound of Bradley Whitmore's laughter, loud and performative in the way that demanded attention from everyone within earshot. He was holding court at the popular table, regaling his friends with some story that involved exaggerated gestures and knowing looks in Malik's direction. The message was clear. Whatever protection Malik thought he might have found was temporary, and Bradley's patience with the situation was wearing thin. The afternoon violin lesson provided its usual refuge from social complexities. Mr. Petrov had Malik working on a particularly challenging passage from Bach, the mathematical precision of the composition requiring complete focus and leaving no room for distracting thoughts about bullies or social hierarchies. Music had always been Malik's escape, a realm where talent and dedication mattered more than family connections or social positioning. "Do you play with more confidence today?" Mr. Petrov observed as they concluded the lesson. "Something has changed in your approach." "I don't know what you mean. Yesterday, you played like someone apologizing for taking up space. Today, you play like someone who belongs exactly where he is. This is good change. Hold on to this feeling." When the final bell rang, Malik made his way to the main office where his father would be meeting with Mrs. Patterson. The administrative area of Westfield Academy was designed to intimidate and impress in equal measure, with oil paintings of former headmasters gazing down from dark wood panels and leather-bound books that probably hadn't been opened in decades, but conveyed the appropriate sense of tradition and gravitas. David Thompson stood near the reception desk, his presence commanding attention even in a space designed to diminish visitors. He wore his success like a well-tailored suit, comfortable and confident without being ostentatious. When he saw Malik, his face broke into a genuine smile that reminded his son why he worked so hard to make his father proud. "Ready for that meeting, son?" Mrs. Patterson's office was a study in controlled elegance, every object carefully chosen to convey authority, tradition, and just enough warmth to avoid seeming completely intimidating. She greeted David with the kind of professional courtesy that successful people used when they needed each other but didn't necessarily like each other. Malik took a seat in one of the leather chairs facing her massive desk, feeling small despite his father's reassuring presence. "Mr. Thompson, thank you for coming in. I understand you wanted to discuss the computer lab donation and some other matters." David's expression grew serious, and Malik felt a shift in the room's atmosphere that suggested this meeting would cover more than hardware specifications. "Actually, Mrs. Patterson, I wanted to talk about my son's experience here at Westfield Academy, specifically about the bullying he's been enduring and the school's apparent inability to address it effectively." The words hit Malik like a physical blow. His father knew. Somehow, despite all of Malik's careful efforts to handle the situation independently, David had discovered what was happening in the hallways and classrooms of the prestigious institution they'd worked so hard to access. Mrs. Patterson's face remained carefully neutral, but Malik caught the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested she'd been expecting this conversation. "I'm not aware of any specific incidents involving your son, Mr. Thompson. If there have been problems, I wish Malik had felt comfortable bringing them to our attention." "Oh, but you are aware," David said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of calm authority that had made him successful in boardrooms across the country. "And because I've spent the last week reviewing security footage, interviewing staff members, and documenting a pattern of harassment that has been ongoing for months." He opened his briefcase and withdrew a folder thick with papers, photographs, and what appeared to be printed emails. "Indeed, I have video evidence of my son being cornered in hallways, witness statements from custodial staff who've overheard threatening conversations, and documentation of academic sabotage that your teachers have either ignored or actively enabled." Mrs. Patterson's composure cracked slightly, her professional mask slipping to reveal the concern of someone who realized that their carefully managed institution was about to face scrutiny it couldn't afford. "Mr. Thompson, I assure you that Westfield Academy takes any allegations of bullying very seriously. If you have specific concerns—" "I have more than concerns," David interrupted, his voice still calm, but carrying an edge that made Malik sit up straighter. And I have evidence of systematic harassment based on race and socioeconomic status, enabled by a culture of privilege that treats certain students as untouchable, regardless of their behavior. The room fell silent, except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of students in the hallway outside. Malik stared at his father with a mixture of admiration and terror, understanding that this moment would change everything about his experience at Westfield Academy, for better or worse. Furthermore, David continued, I've been in contact with the families of 3 other students who've experienced similar treatment. It seems that my son's situation is not unique, merely the most recent example of a problem that this institution has been ignoring for years. Mrs. Patterson's face had gone pale, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles showed white beneath her skin. What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Thompson? David leaned forward slightly, his presence filling the space between them. I'm proposing that Westfield Academy implement immediate and comprehensive changes to address this culture of harassment. Zero-tolerance policies with real consequences, mandatory sensitivity training for students and staff, and an independent review of disciplinary procedures to ensure they're applied equally regardless of family connections. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle before continuing. Tony, I'm also proposing that the school publicly acknowledge its failures and commit to creating an environment where all students can succeed regardless of their background. And I'm proposing that this conversation serves as notice that any future incidents involving my son or any other student will result in legal action that will make national headlines. The threat hung in the air like smoke, and Malik could see Mrs. Patterson calculating the potential damage to the school's reputation, the financial implications of lawsuits and negative publicity, the delicate balance of power that kept institutions like Westfield Academy functioning smoothly. Of course, Mr. Thompson, we want all our students to feel safe and welcomed here. Perhaps we could schedule a follow-up meeting to discuss specific implementation strategies. Actually, David said, standing and gathering his papers, I think we should discuss this with the entire parent community. I've arranged for a special meeting tomorrow evening where these issues can be addressed openly and transparently. Mrs. Patterson's eyes widened with something approaching panic. A parent meeting, Mr. Thompson. Surely we can handle this through proper channels. The proper channels have failed my son and other students for months, David replied firmly. It's time for a more direct approach. The meeting is tomorrow at 7 p.m. in the main auditorium. I trust you'll ensure that all relevant staff and board members are present. As they left Mrs. Patterson's office, Malik felt as if he were walking through a dream. The hallways that had felt like a gauntlet of potential humiliation suddenly seemed different, less threatening somehow. Students and teachers they passed looked at his father with expressions ranging from curiosity to recognition, and Malik realized that David Thompson's reputation extended far beyond the business world. "Dad," Malik said as they reached the parking lot, "how did you know about the bullying, I mean?" David stopped walking and turned to face his son, his expression gentle but serious. "And son, do you really think I wouldn't notice when my child comes home every day looking like he's been through a war? Do you think your mother and I haven't seen the way you've been withdrawing, the way your confidence has been eroding despite your academic success?" Malik felt tears threatening, the emotional weight of months of isolation and fear finally finding release. "I didn't want to worry you. I thought I could handle it myself." "You shouldn't have to handle it yourself," David said, pulling his son into a hug that felt like coming home after a long journey. "That's what family is for. That's what parents are for. And that's what a school administration should be for, though they seem to have forgotten that responsibility." The drive home was quiet, both of them processing the magnitude of what had just happened. Malik stared out the window at the familiar streets of their neighborhood, understanding that tomorrow would bring changes he couldn't fully anticipate. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating, like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing you might actually be able to fly. That evening, the Thompson family gathered in their living room for a conversation that felt both overdue and overwhelming. Angela had prepared Malik's favorite dinner, but the food sat largely untouched as they discussed the events of the day and the challenges that lay ahead. "I want you to understand something, son," David said, his voice carrying the weight of experience and hard-won wisdom. "What we're doing isn't just about you. though your well-being is our primary concern. It's about changing a system that has been broken for too long, about ensuring that other children don't have to endure what you've been going through." Angela reached across the table to squeeze Malik's hand. "We're proud of how you've handled this situation, sweetheart. Your strength and dignity in the face of cruelty shows the kind of man you're becoming. But you don't have to be strong all the time. You don't have to face everything alone." Malik nodded, understanding for the first time that his parents' success hadn't insulated them from the challenges of navigating a world where prejudice and privilege intersected in complex ways. They'd been fighting their own battles while trying to shield him from the worst of it, but some lessons could only be learned through direct experience. The next day at school felt surreal, like walking through a movie where everyone knew their lines except him. Teachers spoke to him with a new kind of careful attention, as if they'd suddenly remembered that their interactions with students might be subject to scrutiny. Students whispered in hallways with an energy that suggested news of the upcoming parent meeting had spread through the school's social networks faster than wildfire. Bradley Whitmore and his friends maintained their distance, but Malik could feel their eyes on him throughout the day, calculating and measuring in ways that suggested they were reassessing their approach to the situation. The balance of power had shifted overnight, and everyone was trying to understand what that meant for the carefully maintained social hierarchies that governed life at Westfield Academy. During lunch, Emma Rodriguez slid into the seat across from Malik with an expression of barely contained excitement. "Is it true? Did your dad really threaten to sue the school?" "He didn't threaten anything," Malik replied carefully. "He just made it clear that things need to change. My mum is so excited about the parent meeting tonight. She's been talking about the problems at this school for years, but nobody wanted to be the first to speak up. Your dad just gave everyone permission to tell the truth." The afternoon violin lesson provided a welcome respite from the charged atmosphere that had settled over the school. Mr. Petrov seemed oblivious to the drama swirling through the hallways, focused instead on helping Malik master a particularly challenging piece that would be featured in the upcoming winter concert. "Osh, your playing has changed again," the elderly teacher observed as they concluded their session. "Yesterday, you played with confidence. Today, you play with purpose. This is even better. What's the difference? Confidence is about believing in yourself. Purpose is about believing in something larger than yourself. Music with purpose can change hearts, can heal wounds, can build bridges between people who think they have nothing in common." As evening approached, Malik found himself both dreading and anticipating the parent meeting that would determine the future of his experience at Westfield Academy. He'd spent months feeling invisible and powerless, but tonight he would be at the center of a conversation that could transform the entire school culture. The responsibility felt enormous, but for the first time in months, he didn't feel alone in carrying it. The main auditorium was packed when the Thompson family arrived, with parents filling seats that were usually reserved for student performances and graduation ceremonies. The air buzzed with nervous energy and whispered conversations, the kind of charged atmosphere that preceded important community decisions. Malik recognized faces from school events and charity galas, but tonight they looked different, more serious and focused than he'd ever seen them. Mrs. Patterson stood at the podium looking like someone who'd aged a decade in the past 24 hours, her usual composure replaced by the careful control of someone walking through a minefield. Board members flanked her on the stage, their expressions ranging from concerned to openly hostile, depending on their relationship with the families involved in the evening's discussion. David Thompson rose from his seat in the front row, his presence commanding immediate attention from everyone in the auditorium. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly to the back of the room without seeming to strain, the product of years of addressing large groups and hostile audiences. "Thank you all for coming tonight. I know this is an unusual gathering, but we're here to discuss an issue that affects every family in this room, whether you realize it or not. We're here to talk about the culture at Westfield Academy and whether it reflects the values we want to instill in our children." He gestured toward Malik, who felt hundreds of eyes turning in his direction. "My son has been attending this school for 6 months, and in that time he's experienced systematic harassment based on his race and his family's background. But this isn't just about my son. It's about a culture that allows certain students to believe they're above consequences, that treats some families as more valuable than others, that perpetuates the very prejudices we claim to be educating our children to overcome. A murmur ran through the audience, some voices expressing support, while others carried notes of skepticism or defensiveness. Malik could see Mrs. Whitmore sitting several rows back, her face a mask of controlled fury, while other parents leaned forward with expressions of genuine concern and interest. "I have documentation," David continued, "of incidents that have been ignored, complaints that have been dismissed, and a pattern of behavior that would be unacceptable in any workplace, but has been tolerated in an institution that claims to prepare our children for leadership roles in society." He opened his folder and began reading specific examples, his voice steady and factual as he described hallway confrontations, classroom humiliations, and administrative indifference. With each incident, Malik felt a weight lifting from his shoulders, the burden of carrying these experiences alone finally being shared with people who had the power to demand change. "But I'm not here just to catalogue problems," David said, his tone shifting towards something more hopeful. "I'm here to propose solutions. Real changes that will ensure every student at Westfield Academy can focus on learning and growing instead of simply surviving." He outlined a comprehensive plan that included policy changes, training programs, accountability measures, and ongoing assessment protocols. The proposals were detailed and thoughtful, clearly the product of extensive research and consultation with education experts. As he spoke, Malik could see parents throughout the auditorium nodding in agreement, their faces reflecting recognition of problems they'd perhaps suspected but hadn't known how to address. When David finished speaking, Mrs. Patterson returned to the podium with the careful movements of someone trying to regain control of a situation that had spiraled beyond her management. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson, for bringing these concerns to our attention. The administration takes these allegations very seriously and is committed to investigating every incident thoroughly." "With respect, Mrs. Patterson," interrupted a voice from the middle of the auditorium. Malik turned to see Dr. Rodriguez, Emma's mother, standing with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to speaking truth to power. "Investigation isn't enough. We need immediate action and long-term systemic change. Our children can't wait for bureaucratic processes while they're being traumatized in hallways and classrooms." Other parents began standing, sharing their own stories and concerns. A pattern emerged of incidents that had been minimized, complaints that had been discouraged, and a culture of silence that protected perpetrators while isolating victims. The testimonies painted a picture of an institution that had lost sight of its educational mission in favor of maintaining social hierarchies and protecting influential families. Mrs. Whitmore finally stood, her voice shaking with barely controlled anger. "I find it interesting that we're having this conversation based on the accusations of one family who's been here for less than a year. Perhaps the problem isn't with the school culture, but with unrealistic expectations and an inability to adapt to established traditions." The auditorium fell silent, the tension so thick it seemed to press against Malik's chest like a physical weight. He could feel the moment balanced on a knife's edge, understanding that how the community responded to this challenge would determine not just his own future at Westfield Academy, but the experiences of every student who didn't fit the traditional mold. David Thompson stood again, his voice calm but carrying an edge that made everyone lean forward to listen. "Mrs. Whitmore, I appreciate your perspective, but I think you're missing the point. This isn't about adapting to traditions. It's about examining whether those traditions serve our children or harm them. And based on the testimonies we've heard tonight, it's clear that change is not just necessary, but overdue." He gestured toward the packed auditorium, his eyes sweeping across faces that reflected the diversity of the modern community that Westfield Academy claimed to serve. "Look around this room. These are successful families who've chosen this school because they believe in educational excellence. But excellence without character is meaningless. Achievement without empathy is hollow. We can do better, and our children deserve better." The applause that followed started slowly, but built to a crescendo that filled the auditorium with the sound of a community finding its voice. Malik felt tears streaming down his face, not from sadness or fear, but from the overwhelming relief of finally being seen and heard and believed. Mrs. Patterson returned to the podium one final time, her expression suggesting that she understood the political realities of the situation, even if she didn't personally embrace them. 2. The administration will be forming a task force to address these concerns, with representation from parents, students, faculty, and community members. We'll be implementing immediate interim measures while developing long-term solutions that reflect our commitment to creating a safe and inclusive environment for all students. The meeting concluded with the formation of committees, the scheduling of follow-up sessions, and the kind of organizational energy that suggested real change might actually be possible. As families filed out of the auditorium, Malik found himself surrounded by students and parents who'd never spoken to him before, offering support and sharing their own experiences with courage that had been inspired by his family's willingness to speak truth to power. Bradley Whitmore approached as the crowd thinned, his usual swagger replaced by something that might have been uncertainty. "Thompson," he said quietly, his voice lacking its usual edge of superiority. Malik tensed, unsure what to expect from this unexpected encounter. "Yeah, Look, maybe things got out of hand sometimes. Maybe we could start over." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was an acknowledgement that the balance of power had shifted permanently. Malik studied Bradley's face, seeing for the first time not a privileged antagonist, but a 13-year-old boy who'd been raised in a system that rewarded cruelty and was now trying to figure out how to navigate a world where those rules no longer applied. "Maybe," Malik replied, his voice steady and dignified. "But starting over means actually changing, not just saying different words." Bradley nodded, his expression suggesting that he understood the distinction. As he walked away, Malik felt a complex mixture of emotions, not quite forgiveness, but something approaching hope that people could grow and change when given the opportunity and incentive to do so. The weeks that followed brought transformations that exceeded even David Thompson's optimistic expectations. The task force met regularly, developing policies that were implemented with surprising speed and effectiveness. Students found themselves in mandatory workshops about respect and inclusion, while teachers received training on recognizing and addressing bias in their classrooms. More importantly, the culture began to shift in subtle but meaningful ways. Hallway conversations became more inclusive, lunch tables more integrated, and academic achievement celebrated regardless of the student's background or family connections. It wasn't perfect, change never is, but it was real and sustainable in ways that gave Malik hope for the future. The winter concert provided a perfect showcase for these changes. Malik performed a solo piece on his grandmother's violin, the same instrument that had provided comfort during his darkest moments at Westfield Academy. As the music filled the auditorium, he could see faces in the audience that reflected genuine appreciation for his talent rather than surprise at his abilities. After the performance, as families gathered in the lobby for refreshments and congratulations, Malik found himself surrounded by classmates who discovered that shared appreciation for music could bridge differences they'd thought were insurmountable. Emma Rodriguez beamed with pride as she introduced him to her extended family, while even some of Bradley's friends approached to compliment his performance with what seemed like genuine respect. David and Angela Thompson watched from across the room, their faces glowing with the kind of pride that comes not just from their child's individual achievement, but from seeing him thrive in an environment that had once seemed hostile and unwelcoming. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had led to a destination that was better than anything they'd originally hoped for. Mr. Petrov approached as the crowd began to thin, his weathered face creased with the kind of smile that suggested deep satisfaction. "Tonight you played with all three qualities," he said, his accent making the words sound like a blessing. "Confidence, purpose, and joy. This is the complete musician, but more importantly, this is the complete human being." As the Thompson family drove home through streets that sparkled with early winter snow, Malik reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The bullying hadn't disappeared overnight, and the work of building a truly inclusive community would continue for years to come. But something fundamental had changed, not just in the policies and procedures of Westfield Academy, but in the understanding that silence in the face of injustice was itself a form of complicity. "I'm proud of you, son," David said, as they pulled into their driveway, the house glowing warmly in the darkness. "Not just for your performance tonight, but for the courage you've shown throughout this entire experience. You could have let the bullying break your spirit, but instead you used it as motivation to become stronger and more compassionate. Malik nodded, understanding that the lessons he'd learned over the past months would serve him well beyond the walls of Westfield Academy. He'd discovered that standing up for what's right often requires more courage than staying silent, but that the rewards, both personal and communal, make the risk worthwhile. 6 months later, Malik stood once again in the main auditorium of Westfield Academy, but this time he was addressing the incoming class of new students as part of the school's revised orientation program. His role was to share his experience and help newcomers understand that their voices mattered, that their backgrounds were assets rather than obstacles, and that the school community was committed to ensuring every student could thrive. When I first came to Westfield Academy, he told the assembled 6th graders, their faces reflecting the same mixture of excitement and nervousness he'd felt not so long ago. I thought success meant fitting in and not making waves. I learned that real success means being true to yourself while working to make your community better for everyone. He gestured toward the diverse group of students, parents, and faculty members who'd gathered for the orientation, a visual representation of the changes that had transformed the school's culture. You're joining a community that values excellence, but we've learned that excellence without character is meaningless. We're here to support each other, to celebrate our differences, and to ensure that every voice is heard and valued. The applause that followed felt different from the polite recognition he'd received during his early days at the school. This was the sound of a community that had learned to appreciate authenticity over conformity, courage over comfort, and justice over the maintenance of unjust traditions. As the new students dispersed to meet their teachers and explore their classrooms, Malik felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Bradley Whitmore, now an 8th grader who'd become an unexpected ally in the ongoing work of cultural transformation. "Good speech," Bradley said, his voice carrying none of the mockery that had once characterized their interactions. "I think you reached them. Thanks. It feels good to be able to help other kids avoid what I went through." Bradley nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You know, I've been thinking about what you said that day in the hallway, about bullies picking on people because they're afraid of something in themselves. I think you were right. I think I was afraid that if I didn't put other people down, someone might notice that I wasn't as special as I thought I was." It was the closest thing to a genuine apology that Malik had received, and he appreciated the honesty behind it. We all have things we're afraid of. The difference is whether we let those fears make us cruel, or whether we use them to become more understanding. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of David Thompson, who'd taken time from his busy schedule to attend the orientation and witness his son's role in welcoming new students. His face glowed with the kind of pride that comes from seeing your child not just succeed, but contribute to something larger than themselves. "Ready to head home?" David asked, though his tone suggested he was in no hurry to leave this moment of triumph. "Almost," Malik replied, his eyes scanning the auditorium where new friendships were forming and old barriers were being dismantled one conversation at a time. "I just want to make sure everyone feels welcome." As they finally walked toward the parking lot, David reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The decision to confront the bullying at Westfield Academy had been risky, potentially damaging to his business relationships and his family's social standing, but the results had exceeded his wildest hopes, creating not just a better environment for his son, but a model for how communities could address systemic problems through courage, persistence, and a commitment to justice. "You know," he said to Malik as they reached their car, "your grandmother would be so proud of what you've accomplished here. Not just the academic success or the musical achievements, but the way you've used your experience to help others. That's the real measure of a life well lived." Malik smiled, feeling the weight of his grandmother's violin case in his hand, and understanding that the music he'd learned to make was just one way of contributing to the harmony of the world around him. The bullying that had once seemed like an insurmountable obstacle had become the catalyst for changes that would benefit generations of students to come. If this story of transformation and courage has resonated with you, I'd love to hear about a time when you or someone you know stood up to injustice, even when it felt risky or difficult. Share your experience in the comments below, because every act of bravery, no matter how small, contributes to the larger work of building communities where everyone can thrive. And if this ending has reminded you that change is possible when we find the courage to speak truth to power, consider sharing this story with someone who might need that reminder today, because sometimes the most important battles are won not with violence or vengeance, but with the simple insistence that every person deserves dignity, respect, and the chance to reach their full potential.